Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and boy oh boy, I think they're actually coming after your privacy phones, ladies and gentlemen. This ain't a privacy phone, it's an iPhone. Want to know what a real privacy phone is? Something like a grapheneOS powered Pixel device. Now, this phone is actually even outdated. So, a lot of people ask me, but Muta, how do I make sure I get a phone that's private? Something that's unhackable, something that I can use every day without worrying that some creepy person is looking into my messages. Now, obviously, the simple thing is common sense. Don't go to a weird, shady site.com and open up a PDF file and, load it with malware every day. I have some scumbag emailing me telling me that my Amazon account is hacked and sends me a PDF file or some bullshit. I don't open it because I'll tell you right now, if I do, this whole channel is going to get hacked and replaced with bullshit like crypto scams and all that nonsense, okay? And that's a whole headache right there. Now, if you want to know the easiest way to get a secure device, you actually go and buy one of these Google Pixel phones. Probably not that Pixel 11. From what I hear, the new thing that they've added is apparently all Gemini related. You probably want to just buy something that's like a Google Pixel 10, okay? It's a little bit cheaper, still expensive, but you want to buy a Google phone. But you might be like, Muta, a Google phone for privacy? Now you're trolling. Not really. You can actually get something known as grapheneOS. grapheneOS basically runs on most modern Pixel devices, and it's incredibly simple. All you need is the phone, a USB cable that probably comes with the phone, a computer, or any device with a modern operating system. In fact, if you install it right now, go to the USB-based installer. It's as simple as long as you have Windows 10, Windows 11, Mac OS, whatever the fuck, Arch Linux, Debian, Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Chrome OS, grapheneOS. Want to do a little digital human centipede action? grapheneOS to grapheneOS. Android 14, 15, 16, 17. As long as you have all of this stuff, you can also use end-of-life versions, but they're not supported, because I'm sure if you tried using Windows 98 somehow, the actual fucking developers for grapheneOS are not going to spend a second helping you, because you're a psychopath. As long as you have a modern browser like Chromium, Vanadium, Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Brave, as long as you follow basic instructions like plugging in your phone, opening up OEM unlocking on your device, as long as your device supports it, unlike Samsung devices where they want to lock this shit down harder than Fort fucking Knox. And then, of course, you can just flash it using these console commands. It's as simple as connecting the device to your computer, clicking this button where it sends the command over the flash or over the USB cable, and just does all the complicated stuff for you. As long as you're a human being capable of following very simple directions, okay? And again, I'm not saying this to be like mean. If I can do it, you can do it, okay? Simple as that. And of course, once you get this going, you'll have a phone that is so private that apparently when it comes to mercenary hacking groups being hired by the FBI, they can get into iPhone, Samsung devices, but they can't get into a graphene phone. In fact, there is an individual in Atlanta who gave a PIN code that wiped the phone, not really wiped, but made everything on it inaccessible to the TSA, enough to the point that the individual who gave that PIN is now facing possible legal action. Why? Because he dared to use a privacy phone and was not willing to give up his information to a state that put him up basically at gunpoint to give him that information. No, not happening. I think privacy is a human goddamn right. And if we don't have privacy, I swear to God, I would rather be shot in the fucking head and thrown 6 feet under, okay? Let's talk about grapheneOS a little bit more. Now, over the last few weeks, there have been a lot of issues, for instance, right? grapheneOS is not perfect. Now, if you have banking applications, you have sensitive stuff, a lot of these applications will block the use of grapheneOS, right? We've seen this in the past with even things like age verification applications. Even vehicle manufacturers like Volkswagen, okay? I've never owned a Volkswagen, okay? I don't even think I've driven one, actually. But from what I hear, they're supposedly decent vehicles. Not decent enough to support people on grapheneOS. Basically, this car company is deciding we're not going to support this product. So they sent out a mysterious update which went live. Basically what happened was everyone was logged out. And effectively, if you were on a grapheneOS and you were in your, Volkswagen app, you went in, tried logging in, and effectively they said, listen, the use of this is only supported on iOS devices and Android with supported operating system versions. So again, to give you an idea, people who were using, this car brand, they were using this application, all of a sudden, the car application was just not fucking working on their phone. Okay, why? Because the people demanded privacy on their phones, and they weren't given it. Now, the fellows at grapheneOS basically say, leave a 1-star review. Basically review. Now, again, per YouTube's terms of services, I don't support review bombing, okay? But the idea of it is, ultimately, at the end of the day, what is the core goal here? Google has misled companies about what Play Integrity API provides. It doesn't genuinely enforce having a secure device or a legitimate app. It only pretends to. It leaves huge holes open. It enforces Google's business interests and bans having a reasonably secure device with grapheneOS. Most companies are unlikely to stop using the Play Integrity API, but most are willing to start permitting grapheneOS via hardware attestation with enough pressure. So okay, to give you guys the nerdy stuff aside, when it comes to Android devices, there's actually two forms of, I guess you could say, attestation, right? For instance, Play Integrity API is Google's way of doing verification through their cloud, through their servers. And hardware attestation is actually something built into every single Android device. So at your core, in your phone, especially on modern devices, there are secure enclaves, secure perimeters where keys are given, where keys are made, and a lot of these, a lot of the actual verification kind of happens on the device without ever giving out the user's actual private keys, right? It's how we kind of achieve something known as hardware attestation. Now, Google has found ways to sort of gaslight people into using their services, so everyone kind of, in some roundabout way, is forced to use, Google's own service over something else, especially from grapheneOS. It's actually better and much more secure for you in the long term, and it actually gives you more ownership of your private device. So all things aside, where does this story kind of lead? It's not Volkswagen that we have to be talking about. So remember a while back where I looked at the European Union's digital ID application? So for anybody that doesn't know, EU is working on a digital identity wallet. So effectively, it's kind of their answer to age verification all over the internet. Basically, an application installed on your iPhone, your Android device, that effectively keeps information on your device, that effectively exists to allow you to verify yourself all over the world, around the internet, on internet services, I guess without providing a whole bunch of private information. It kind of sounds good in theory until you peel back the layers and start to see how stupid the actual implementation is and how counterintuitive it is for people that actually care about their privacy. So for instance, let's say that you want to get a privacy grapheneOS, right? grapheneOS phone. You can get one yourself. There's also other people out there that want to buy something like a Linux phone, for instance. So for instance, people who purchase these Linux phone devices, there's Jolla phones, there's Pure phones, so on and so forth. These are people that are trying to live in an ecosystem that's outside what is basically controlled by big companies, right? When you buy an iPhone, the only person that gets to decide what you do and don't do on that phone is Apple. When you purchase a Samsung device, at this point, Samsung is basically the arbiter and decider of what operating system that you can install on this device and really what you're able to do. And ultimately, for a lot of people who buy Linux phones or Pixels with grapheneOS, they're trying to escape the bubble and basically have a phone that truly belongs to them and doesn't really have to deal with any of these third-party companies that are constantly sending us ads to our phone and all this extra bullshit we don't need. What they mentioned over here, this is back again when they were talking about the Android wallet application, the Android side of it, was relying on specifics only available in a limited set of hardware architectures just to cling on to a process which by definition can only be effective in a lockdown environment, has no net positive effects but just worsens the overall situation. Proposed fix, accept the fact that some kind of client-side rate-limiting approach was a bad idea to begin with and stop trying to push squares into round holes. I fully understand how this is somewhat awkward given those characteristics, yada yada yada, but of course down here you can see that the response, rather, is hardware-bound attestation is a requirement of the project. Not an implementation detail we can simply drop. It's out of the question. If you have concrete improvement proposals, we welcome them as suggestions against the tech spec. So anyways, I wanted to then look into the technical specification. So again, let's look a little bit closer into what they're actually saying in their own words. So in order to make this age verification thing even somewhat remotely useful, because again, the whole point of this is to make sure every person can be relatively proven that they're above a certain age, and especially if that person is actually a real individual, like a specific unique person. So if you look into their paperwork right over here, 4.2 age verification app here, you can see that when it comes to them talking about these requirements, they say that the age verification app shall rely on the device's native cryptographic hardware capabilities. So for iPhones, it's the secure enclave where your keys are stored there. It's the trusted execution environment or Strongbox and/or on Android if and when they're available, right? So again, the actual reality of all of this is, ultimately at the end of the day, is this is kind of a weird target on people that are going for the open market, right, for phones, especially people that are going for Linux phones, or even possibly the grapheneOS side of devices too. Now, interestingly enough, even deeper into it, when you look at things like the authentication workflow, when they talk about the AVI requests a proof of age attestation using OID for VCI against the wallet attestation authentication method, what's important about this over here is that what direction do they go? Do they allow grapheneOS to exist, or in this case, do they only operate against Google-backed, lists, for instance? And in that case, that can be very, very bad. Now, obviously, look, I don't think the grapheneOS guys were ever going to cave into age attestation or any of this stuff anyways, but when it comes to looking at these applications that, again, a lot of these governments want to push into the future. The other reality, too, is, like I showed you earlier with the Volkswagen example and all these other banking systems, the option to properly verify and keep a device inside these systems is all right there anyways. Unfortunately, it seems as if there is a concerted effort from, I assume, Google, Apple, there's not really a choice there, to sort of live within their own sort of ecosystem that effectively locks everybody who doesn't want to be associated with Google completely out of the picture. And again, when you look at things like these age verification systems, again, if it's successful here, it'll spread to the entire world. I mean, we're already kind of starting to see the gears turning over here too. And ultimately, I think that puts a lot of devices that really are ultimately there for people's privacy in actual risk. I'm not talking about Linux phones personally, because while I get that there's a market for that stuff, I personally think it's way too out there. I don't think it'll ever really catch on. To be honest with you, Android devices, if you're going to be using something that is in line with every other smartphone, you probably should just be using an Android device with grapheneOS, simply because unless the only thing you do on your phone is literally make a call, send a text message, browse the web, yeah, the Linux phones are super duper great, but I'm sure that there's people that sort of play around with applications. You know, in a roundabout way, it's more of an extreme version, in my opinion, than what we get on things like Linux gaming, right? I'm somebody that loves to play video games on Linux, but sometimes I need that Windows computer. Like the other night, I was playing fucking Rainbow Six Siege with Tyler, one of my good friends. And the only way I was able to play it was on a Windows computer, because the anti-cheat locks out Linux because Linux can't be trusted in the sphere of online gaming. It's one of the reasons why I've stopped playing most of these online games, and I kind of just started playing MMOs like World of Warcraft again, because it seems like MMOs don't really give a shit about Linux gamers. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the devices that we own, I think the direction that we're all kind of headed to is forcing ourselves into either Apple or Google's camps. And the people that exist solely to find their way outside the matrix, like, there is no reason, in my opinion, that a user who is using an Android device shouldn't just use grapheneOS to begin with. An Android device without a grapheneOS-like operating system overlooking it, or just grapheneOS installed, is leaving privacy and safety at the table. Not only is it a better operating system, not only does it perform better than all of the extra bloated slop that goes on even on the biggest Android-like smartphones out there, it's just the best option to have. And to see everyone sort of starting to go to war with it, governments, big banks, big app makers, even the small app companies like Volkswagen, for crying out loud. I mean, they're a car company, but just imagine, right? Like, we're at a point where even car companies are locking out people simply because they choose to fight for their own privacy just a little bit. But yeah, this is something that's sort of been popping up in my entire feed. This is something that's sort of been looking up. And again, I like to point this stuff out before it actually ends up passing, because once it passes, once it goes through, I mean, trying to undo this kind of shit is a waste of your fucking time. But addressing it now and educating the people, to me, this video's success comes from if just one person, takes their Google Pixel or any appropriate phone and installs grapheneOS on it. To me, that's a win, okay? It's always a win if I can just convince one guy per video to, like, switch over to Linux. Like, that's a win to me, okay? So a win to me is somebody switching over to something that's genuinely better for them. And, to see the hostility from a lot of these, governments and a lot of these big companies, a lot of these big organizations, there's probably some validity to them fighting back when they realize that, look, at the end of the day, there's options for people, and if they learn how to get them, it's going to make our job a whole heck of a lot harder. The reason they're going down this road is they're hoping that ultimately it's almost frictionless for people who buy their phones, like their basic Android phones and their iPhones. But for the few people out there that genuinely aim for their privacy, they want those people to effectively go extinct, and go extinct silently, instead of putting up that fight and, again, raising awareness. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.